So maybe you want to just introduce yourself, who you are, what your jam is.
My jam.
Hmm.
I am Dr. Erin Watson. I work as a relationship and intimacy coach in a small town. I am trained as a therapist, so my background is in therapy, and I also am an instructor at the local university. So working with people and teaching, running workshops, etc. is that's my jam. That's where my absolute passion lies. But that's just sort of the career hat that I wear.
Are there any other hats you want to talk about?
um, I think of myself as an introvert. I am a dancer. I am a performer. I am a creative. Um, I say I'm an intellectual, but that sounds a bit snobby, but in the sense that I love deep questions, big questions, and overthinking everything. And I am a fur mother of two absolutely perfect wiener dogs.
Did they do anything for you for Mother's Day yesterday?
Oh my goodness, they didn't.
Ungrateful.
I know.
Not so perfect.
I know. I didn't even think about that. I'll have a talk with them.
Set the expectation.
They brought love into my life.
That's fair.
Yeah.
That's a consolation.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. Well, welcome. I mean, we've known each other for a while
Yeah.
in various capacities. Our worlds overlap in a few places. Um, I will say who I am, just in case. Um, so my name's Olive Von Topp. Um, my pronouns are she and her. Olive is my performer name and the name that I run my business under. I am a burlesque performer, teacher, and producer with my burlesque troupe, the Femme Rebels, and I am an empowerment coach. Um, Similarly to you, I don't know, like I like teaching a lot and writing and creating, collaborating. Um, and yeah, I don't like overthinking things, but I spend a
Ooh.
lot of time more in regards to myself and which can be good and not so good. Um, I am a fur mother, a mother to two ungrateful fur babies, one of whom is sitting right here. This is
Oh.
Ella. Can you hear that ding?
Yes.
I don't know. Is it yours or is it me? Because I don't have anything open. Do I have something open? Doesn't matter.
I
Anyway,
closed my tabs, so we'll see if it disappears. That was on me.
no thing. So, um, we sort of know each other through. Well, I remember you speaking like years and years and years ago at a Women's Day event that I was part of organizing in my other job. So I do oh, Ella's sneezing. Oh dear. Um, I refer to it as my muggle life. So I do some like community development work and used to do support work. So yes, it was a Women's Day event, and you were, I believe, and you were speaking about sexting in youth.
Mm.
Um, and then I think, um, do we I know I hired you to speak to run a workshop, a
Yeah.
empowerment workshop as part of my um, sex and pleasure workshop series.
Yeah.
And I don't know, our lives just kind of crossed in various ways. Yeah.
Yeah. Then it was burlesque, I think, after that.
Oh yes.
We were destined to cross paths.
True. It's true.
Absolutely. Yes, I remember that workshop. I guess that's the other hat that I wear is the my dissertation work on sexting that I completed a while back. I work with parents and coaches, teachers, advocates to help youth navigate digital culture. So dating, sexting, online presence, image, body image. An absolute passion of mine is sex tech and what's new and fresh and uh, concerning and enlightening all at once. I adore that world.
What is new? Just like maybe quickly, what's happening with the what's up with the youth and
What's
the
up with the what
texting?
you know what's really fun? Canada has seen a rise in vibrator purchases.
Like
Uh,
since COVID?
like 140% since COVID
Like
started. And
not
compared to the States has seen like a 75% increase.
wow.
So like, oh, Canada. And people are starting to use sexting. People who would never even consider sort of that digital communication are using it to maintain intimate connection and erotic connection, both with like people they're meeting on Tinder that they can't actually meet up with, or maintaining long distance relationships when you are in self isolation. But my absolute favorite is, um, like long term married couples that their kids are running around and they're going absolutely crazy, but they're sexting each other from like one side of the couch to the other. Because it's,
Amazing.
in a way, it's like sanity. Is there a way that we can ground ourselves in the weirdness of the world right now? And I think we always come back to our erotic nature for some reason.
Sure. Well, it is like you said, grounding, or it's one of the most innate things, right? So when everything feels so chaotic,
Yeah,
like what is familiar, or what is like, primal, or like a very essential part of us that makes us feel human
absolutely.
and sane. So
Absolutely.
that's
That's,
so cool.
I know.
I'm really curious about how that this is going to change the face of, dating and
Yeah,
etc. Any predictions or thoughts or
that's a good question. I don't know. I often don't really make predictions, to be honest. I'm just always curious. I'm just always like, I wonder what will happen. I
mm-hmm.
wonder what I'll see. Because sometimes when you make predictions, you kind of have this like narrow tunnel vision, and then you're not actually open to the reality of what's going on.
Yeah,
So,
that's fair. I bet your
um,
dissertation didn't go well then. There's no you're like, I don't know. I have no judgment.
that was the nice thing about my dissertation, because I literally went in and was just like, what is the experience for you? Like literally just what is the lived experience? What is sexting like for you? What does it mean? What makes it good? What makes it bad? What are the contexts? What are the influences? Like, there's a blank slate here, tell me everything. And from that, we could develop these fascinating themes. And one of the biggest themes was empowerment and pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And the narrative around sexting and sex tech and digital culture, especially for young girls, especially for youth, is uh-oh, danger, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Yeah.
bad, 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 naughty, shut it down. And what we were finding was women were saying, I feel safer. I can say no. I can walk away. I actually tell them what I like. I'm actually getting my needs met. I'm discovering who I am. I feel part of the sexual relationship now.
Oh
Like
yeah.
this is for me. And in offline spaces, I never felt it was for me. I felt like I was just a performing little doll.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
So
I find like for me personally, like boundaries have been so much easier to communicate through sexting than
yeah,
in person when you're, you know, hot, and it just feels way easier to be like, P.S. This is what I'm into or not into.
exactly. The
You can
buffer
tell now.
is big.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's always that concern that we are going to lose connection and we're going to lose intimacy if we veer too much into the online world. And this COVID situation is giving us a bit of a test run to see actually how are we as humans navigating this? Because we're seeing that using these digital platforms like we are now is creating connection that otherwise might not exist. And that's really life-saving for people. Imagine knowing that without the internet, you might not have access to anyone else in your
Yeah.
community that is out as gay
Mm-hmm.
or has the same like sexual interest as you, or you know is also an introvert or really anxious but is able to text throughout the day and have that again life-saving human connection.
Mm-hmm.
So I do see that we are exploring these online platforms in a way that is really leveraging the necessity of human connection as opposed to distancing us more.
Totally. And I
And
think
we are feeling distanced, right? Like, I don't think anyone is sitting out there necessarily saying, this is amazing. I hope this lasts forever.
mm-hmm. Maybe
Sometimes it's nice.
there's parts of it I really like, and I feel
Of
badly
course.
about that, but there's definitely parts I like. I
Yeah.
think it's interesting because I think, you know, part of the argument about like us moving to digital and disconnection, like pre-pandemic times, is just like we won't have connection.
Mm.
But it's so interesting because now we're forced to be connecting only through technology, and it's not like that craving of physical human connection goes away.
Yeah.
It's not like we're just like,
Yeah.
okay, well, we don't know how to talk to people anymore, we don't crave being
Yeah.
together. It's like it's more apparent.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. I think there's an innate drive that we have that we're still starving for. And knowing that we're starving for it right now gives me hope that the balance of technology versus face to face is going to be fine and is going to be healthy
Mm-hmm.
in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like we're talking about coping here.
Mm-hmm.
How because when this first started, I was like, this is great. Like, I'm not gonna lie, because I'm an introvert. I work from home most of the time, and everybody all of a sudden had to stay at home, and I felt a relief from that.
Mm-hmm.
I felt really, really good because I was like, oh, this is like all of humanity is connected with me because we're all doing this. We're all on the same page. And it was a relief. I felt I didn't feel like um a, a I don't know, lazy outcast or something. Um so at first it was really good, but I have to admit that over time, right, coping goes down. How are you handling this?
It's interesting because I've heard that from a lot of introverted people, like especially at the beginning, that guilt
Mm.
goes away. um I think I'm I don't, I guess I'm an ambivert,
Mm.
but maybe a little bit more extrovert leaning. So, but I haven't, I think for me, it's really highlighted like the need to take care of my introvert,
Mm.
that has been happening for a while. So I'm, you know, I'm pretty extroverted. I work at home, like when I have days off for my business, like pre these times, I would
Mhm.
have a couple days off to work on my business and alone those days. But then it's like, you know, I'm teaching or I'm performing or and other days I'm at work. So I've
Mhm.
had lots of social interaction, and I think there is certainly a part of me that has had some like I don't want to say relief, but it's just been really nice to not have to be a bunch of places and be on
Mhm.
and like all those things. I think there's definitely a part of my introverted personality that I haven't always like taken care of,
Mm.
or haven't realized like how rejuvenating it is for me to have like that time.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in those ways it's been good. Um, there's certainly like things that I really miss, like people and performing, and like lots of the things that I do are events based, and
Yeah.
those are not happening, or they're happening in online spaces. So, but I've also like really enjoyed I think we were talking about this earlier, like the ability to focus on one or two things.
Right.
Similarly to you, I have a lot of interest and do a lot of things, and I've felt at many times that I'm not doing particularly well at any of them. I'm just like, getting by. Um, and to have those things kind of forced where you're like, well, that's just not an option. Like, I'm just not developing new acts, and I'm not producing shows, and I'm not
Mm-hmm.
teaching and coming up with choreo really. So that's like a whole big chunk of time that I've been able to refocus into my business, and like producing content for coaching, and
Mm-hmm.
like trying to do back end business stuff. So that's been kind of nice,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Focus time has been really nice.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you mentioned kind of leaning into your introvert self, or caring for your introvert self, and I'm super curious. Like, there's a lot of perception that when we talk about self-care, especially as coaches or therapists or educators, that self-care means things like take a bubble bath, paint your nails, do your like these ritualistic pampering things. And like when I talk self-care with clients, self-care is a mix of taking action and letting go, right? It's taking action on necessary things in your life that are genuinely bringing you anxiety that need to get done,
Totally. Yeah.
and then letting go when you just can't do things. You don't have the control. The event's canceled. You don't have the resources. You don't have the energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then offering that compassion to yourself when you don't get the balance correct, because we don't,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what, like, when you think of self care, what do you think of? What does it mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I mean, I talk about it a lot with clients. Um, Similarly, like those things are great, the pampering things. And I also talk about, and have been talking about, self worship in
Mm,
like in an act of like, in a self love act. Um, but self care, I mean, loosely defined, is like anything you do for your general mental, physical well being. Um,
mm-hmm.
but I say to clients, like, it's not necessarily like always enjoyable. Like, self care is like
Yes.
establishing and maintaining boundaries, and like,
Yeah.
like saying no to things, and doing some deep personal work, going to therapy, or like
Mm-hmm.
going to a coach, like I'll letting go of expectations, offering self forgiveness, like
Mm-hmm.
all those things, like setting up some type of schedule for yourself and adhering to it, and then again offering compassion when you don't. Like, it's not all good feely stuff.
No, it's not. Self care is hard, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the thing that I help my clients with a lot. But it's the thing that, as a human, I struggle with too, which is self care necessitates doing things that you don't always want to do. It's practicing not having negative self talk as the constant chatter in your head. Working with a coach, like, we help identify blockages, we help identify what's holding people back from achieving their goals and illuminating those things so people can go, I get it, I see the light, I see the next step. But they still have to take the next step.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not always pleasant because, like you said, I think boundaries are huge. Boundaries, assertiveness, knowing your emotional limits, knowing your triggers, and how to manage them.
Mm-hmm.
And self-care is a practice
Mm-hmm.
is a slog sometimes. And, even as coaches, every single day,
Mm-hmm.
we're re-practicing and trying to find that sweet spot that probably will never come,
Mm-hmm.
but
Mm-hmm.
life is getting better along the way.
Yeah, yeah, I'm curious if you've seen in your own life, or if you want to talk about clients, like the correlation between self-care and, whatever, self-improvement, or like life
Mm,
getting better. But yeah, just on your point, it's like it's a commitment, right? It's an ongoing commitment. It's not like, okay, it's Sunday. I mean, I talk about self-care Sunday as like a reminder of like, okay, do something like for yourself, particularly
mhm,
if it's a kind thing today.
mhm.
um, but in general, like, self-care is this ongoing commitment to yourself, just like whatever, brushing your teeth every day, like
Yeah,
it's part of the whole package, right?
yeah. I always find there's not to be binary because there's always people in the middle, but you know, two types of clients. The client that struggles because they indulge in
Mm.
pleasure so much that they're trying to find their grounding, their purpose, their direction. And so self care for them is about finding structure, about practicing routine, about sort of the monotonous work around ethic and self discipline. And then there's the client that is the overachieving, constantly, I'm not good enough, I'm not there, I need to work harder, I need to do this, I need to do that. And then reminding them that pleasure is so important in life, and helping them work through why they believe that they don't deserve
Pleasure.
pleasure and joy
Yeah, big
in
time.
life, you
And
know?
I'd say, it's exciting because I wanted to talk about pleasure.
Mm,
Um, I would say a lot of the clients that I worked with, or work with, have fall in the latter category of like, how do you incorporate pleasure into your life?
yeah.
How is pleasure part of self care? And why do we not think that we deserve pleasure? Which is something that I certainly, like, I come from that group as well, and have done
Mm-hmm.
some work around it, and still continue to do work around it. And um, I think there's like a fear, like, for folks. I don't know if it's like, I'm going to just be like a hedonist and never get anything accomplished if I like indulge in some pleasure, or like, people often confuse pleasure, um, for what I would call like numbing out or buffering.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's maybe a pleasurable activity, but done to the extreme where it's the problem in your life, right? Which is
Yes.
maybe what you were talking about in the first category of folks. But
Yeah.
um, I don't know. Did you want to speak to how pleasure comes up for you and or your clients in the
Well, I
work?
think we probably have similar experiences with our clients because those are the individuals that tend to reach out for coaching.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and I agree. Like, I think there's almost a piece of like loss of control that they're worried about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that if I allow indulgence in my life, I will lose sense of what's grounding me, and I will go off the deep end.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, again, I what you said about numbing out is so important because you have to help people understand that there's a difference between sparking joy and igniting, pleasure in your life, and finding things that truly um, enlighten you versus eating and Netflix feel good, right? Like, that to me is not the same as joy and pleasure.
Exactly.
To me, it feels good because it's just preventing all the negative emotions and the fears that are constantly running around your head because you're trying to be in control of everything all the time so that you don't feel negative emotions ever.
Totally. And it doesn't even feel good because you're not present when you're doing it, right? You're
Yeah.
literally, it's like numbing out. Like it might feel good for a second, but then
Yeah.
you're just, it's not, I mean, it's just like, I don't know. It's like when you have like a huge chocolate bar and you eat the whole thing versus like a couple pieces of it, and the difference of how it tastes because
Yeah.
you know, and being present and being like, oh, this is so good, and savoring it versus like,
Yeah.
you know, you can just eat chocolate anytime and indulging. Maybe that's a poor example, but
No, that's totally it. And I'm so guilty of that because I ate an entire chocolate bar yesterday. And no, I shouldn't even say I consumed. The chocolate bar went in.
what kind?
It was like an Oreo filled dairy milk chocolate. It was delightful, but I didn't experience it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And when people are trying to distance themselves so much from negativity and fear and anxiety because they don't understand or they don't trust their capacity to handle it, so they distance. When you distance yourself from negativity, you also cut off the entire other end of the spectrum, which is joy and pleasure. So how are you supposed to enjoy something like an amazing Oreo filled chocolate bar if all you eat are Oreo filled chocolate bars all the time and none of the nutrient rich stuff?
Totally.
And so I say this, but that is how I live, right? Because again, I'm a human and I will eat an entire box of fruit by the foot.
Fruit by the foot. That's your weakness,
That's my
right?
thing right now.
Sure. That's good.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's an like a great point that I have I talk about. I feel like I'm sure you feel the same. The things that you repeat over and over as a coach. Like if you have to be willing to feel any emotion. First of all, like working with clients, getting familiar with what emotions are and where they're coming from and what thoughts are causing them and then how they feel in their bodies, and then, you know, not being so scared of them, because the reality is if you cut yourself off from those, you're cutting yourself off from all the good emotions too. Like
Yeah.
you don't get to choose.
Yeah. And people cut themselves off not because they inherently believe that certain emotions are bad, although we give them the word negative, which is not ideal, but truly because they don't believe in themselves and their ability to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the beauty of coaching. I've hired coaches, I've hired therapists. I'm biased, obviously, but what better way to live a more embodied life than to go and work with someone who can help you become less afraid
Mm-hmm.
of the entire spectrum of emotions so that you're actually living your life as opposed to observing it going through the motions like on autopilot
Yeah.
through the filter of Netflix and food. Or you know I work a lot with love addiction, and so through the filter of sex and new relationship energy, for example.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I think if I was, there are lots of things I would change in the world, but I mean, one thing I would change, other than like besides sex education to young people, is the ability to like feel emotion and not fear it, like knowing that we can get through any emotion. And I think, yeah, like you said, there people's fear that they can't handle it, but also I think there's a misconception we all have. It goes back to pleasure of like, life is supposed to be good all the time and I'm supposed to be happy all the time, and like I can't feel those things because they're scary and they're unfamiliar and that's not how I'm supposed to feel,
Yeah.
right? Whereas if we give ourselves some space and be like, this is human, and feeling those is part of the human experience, right? And if I want
Mm-hmm.
to experience the broad range of being a human, I have to be willing to feel those. And the thing that happens obviously when we do that is that they become less scary and they feel less intense because
Mm-hmm.
we're willing to feel them. And I mean, I speak from experience as well of somebody who spent a lot of time trying to like get away from feeling emotions, and
Mm-hmm.
it, it's it the difference it has made in my life is, you know, part of the reason that I coach.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's so much pressure. There's so much pressure to be superhuman and to be happy and not just content, like not happy with what we have, but pressure to become almost like ecstatic at all times, to live in an orgasmic state constantly. Like, can you imagine, you know, here we're going down this path, of course we are. Can you imagine being stuck in an orgasm the rest of your life? There would be, there's actually no relief to that. And it would deaden the joy and the anticipation of it and the excitement of it.
Totally. Well, not to get meta, but like, if you don't have the negative, then how do you know that's good? You have no frame of comparison or reference. So like,
Yeah.
we could be in the best state we're in right now. This could be it, but like,
Yeah.
we have to have something to compare that to be like, oh yeah, that is what it feels like to feel pleasure or to feel good.
Yeah.
Too much of it just becomes numbing, or it becomes the norm, and then you have to keep upping.
Yeah, chasing those dopamine hits is big. And I think we don't realize sometimes that every day, every context is going to ebb and flow in terms of what joy means. Like, there have been times in my life where, you know, it's been awful. Like, we've all gone through the worst thing that's ever happened to us so far. And yes, it's important to strive as humans to want to be better. That's what drives us. But we also have to recognize in moments of despair that right now, joy needs to take on a different meaning. You know, you're in a moment of despair, joy might be the marshmallow that you get to eat for dessert. That's not pathetic. That's not sad. That's like, I use the metaphor with my clients, when you're playing Super Mario Brothers and you have to hit the mushroom and it's like boop, boop, boop. You have to find your mushrooms every day, and every day they're going to be different, but you have to look for those things that infuse just a little bit of joy. And that's going to be different from one day to the next.
It's a good reminder, you know, like, and that joy is, again, this idea that joy is this huge orgasmic thing that can only be accessed if we're, you know, perfectly, everything in our lives are done. We have the body we love, we have the partner that we love, we make this amount of money, and then I'll be able to experience.
And then you're allowed. Then you have permission.
Or that's what's going to bring me joy. It's like, if you can't see joy, it's the same. You're the same person. You're just like, your problems are bigger, or like, but if you can't experience joy in here, you're not going to be able to experience it here.
Yeah.
It's so disappointing for folks. Right?
It is, and it almost gives that control away to some sort of like broader societal or structural power that tells you, no, you're not allowed to be happy, because when you're not happy, I can control you more. You know, I can tell you what to buy, I can tell you to be miserable, I can tell you to diet, I can.
Whoa, Erin, are you trying to say that like capitalism is trying to keep us unhappy so that we'll purchase things in order to?
My goodness, did I go there?
Yeah. Well,
I feel like you lose your
Ella
authority. Oh, someone
into plants.
Oh,
you lose your authority.
You lose your authority. You lose your agency in your own life, and maybe this is a bit down a different path, but the thing that I do, because I'm an overthinker, is sometimes when I get a negative emotion, I'm so upset that I have that negative emotion that rather than letting it just sort of like naturally turn into a different emotion, I hold on to it. It's like you are forcing this negative experience to stay with you and fester because you're so angry that it exists.
Mm-hmm. And then is there like some, I don't want to say joy, that's not the word, satisfaction in being angry too? Of like, you know, I was just reading today something about how we have this culture of like outrage and like people being outraged about like really small things, and how much satisfaction that brings for many of us to be able to be, it's like self-righteousness or like whatever, like outraged about this and that, and like holding on to these things because it's like not joy, but it replaces it in some way. Like you get to feel better about yourself because you get to be upset about
anger is one of the few ways that I think society allows us to have a voice. I mean, certainly for men or people who are socialized as men, anger is the emotion that you're allowed to have.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It feels like a productive emotion. It feels like when you're angry, something can be done. Whereas sadness, hurt, despair, depression, you feel completely powerless. And if you're happy, well, you're going against the whole social structure out there that doesn't want you to be happy in it. And it almost feels like too inaccessible or too rebellious for people. So anger is what we have permission to express in a way. I don't know if there's a joy in it. And you're right, joy is maybe not the best word, but there's a catharsis.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or a familiarity too, right? Like those negative emotions can sometimes be really familiar for lots
there's
of
also people. I'm sorry.
No, I was just gonna say, for lots of people, change is scary because those things are like, I know how to be angry and I know how to be sad, and this is a part of my identity. And
yes,
sorry, go ahead.
I think there's a tie to productivity as well. And if there's one sort of overarching thing that I think here in maybe like the Anglophone West, it's that there is a pressure to be constantly productive, and anger feels productive. It feels like you're saying something and moving towards something, and that's the thing that I'm hearing a lot from people and clients and friends and myself included during this self-isolation, is the pressure to be productive. How can I utilize this time? It's like, no, we're in a world pandemic, a matter of life and death for people, and yet the narrative is, how do I grow my business? How do I be happier? How do I write the book? How do I lose the 10 pounds? Like, well, that's going to make people even more miserable.
Absolutely. Well, and we're all products of a society that ties our worth to our productivity. So if you can't,
yes, you're right.
be productive, you can't be worthy. You can't just, and we can't just take time to be like, taking care of myself is productive. Surviving this in the best way that I know how is productive. I mean, I actually talk about this a lot with certain clients, because anything like self-care, pleasure related is frivolous in their brains. So trying to change the narrative of like, okay, if you can't get to I'm worthy without even being productive, like my worth is not determined by my productivity, then like, can you start thinking about self-care as productive, like as a necessary means to be a contributing member of society? Like,
yes. And I mean, obviously survival is necessary to be a contributing member of society. Like, that's the very basic. You need to survive. But I really like this idea of worth, because I think a lot of people don't believe that they're worth self-care.
Absolutely. That's, I think, at the root of most of it. It's just, yeah, I'm not worth it, and I only am worth something based on what I produce and like whatever. And that doesn't include self-care. Like, self-care isn't a production.
How do you go as personal as you want, I guess, but like we all have those days where we need to focus on the letting go aspect of self-care, which is the my friend said, give into the existential void. Like some days, um, some days you stay in bed all day. Some days you're depressed. Some days you don't brush your teeth, or you eat the entire chocolate bar, or you cry all the time, or you panic. How can we begin to embrace the experience of falling apart and breaking down as elements of self-care?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's a great question. I mean, I think back to what I was saying before, I think it's an entirely necessary part of, well, growth as a human in general. So again, if you're thinking about productivity, if you are trying to progress as a human, part of progress can actually be like falling apart to rebuild, let's say, right? Like
Yeah.
that's sort of the cycle of our lives, I think. But it if you think of self-care as something necessary for your health and well-being, like giving into feelings, like letting yourself have days of self-pity, like um, those are all, I think, all necessary parts of taking care of yourself, or getting doing what you need to be doing for your health and well-being. I mean, it's obviously there's a line, right, when it's like weeks of this, and then maybe there might need to be some like medical or professional intervention, or
Sure.
but if you're talking about just letting yourself fall apart those days, and letting yourself just get away in that feeling, and like, giving yourself some space to do that. Like, this might sound really bizarre, and it's not for everyone, but for people who are like really like that A type productive person, like giving yourself like containers of
Yeah.
falling apart time too, where it's like you can have this, whatever, I'm going to do it for an hour or a
Yep.
day or whatever, like this is my allotted time to do this, and then I'll get back to whatever, blah blah blah. But like recognizing that, like, that's, you're going through something so unknown to most people on the planet in this capacity, that like things are going to look
Mm-hmm.
different, and you're going to feel like falling apart probably more often, like,
Yeah.
and that's okay, because like we don't know how, there's no script about how to function in this, right?
Yeah.
And we're all, it
Yeah.
changes day to day, and so there's nothing wrong with
Yeah.
needing to fall apart to be able to get back up and survive tomorrow, you know?
I have 100% given clients like instructions to, or suggestions, to set a timer for a good old cry.
Yep.
Because some people genuinely have held it in for so long that they're not sure it's going to end. And how do they get back on track?
Yep.
And knowing that our emotions are an experience we have, but they're not actually the thing that dictates our life, you can learn that by setting timers, by saying, okay, I'm going to cry. And then I actually have the capacity to stop the tears and move on to something else. I am going to have a day that has all of these different emotions in it. And that's going to give you that capacity, or that sense of confidence in yourself, that you can be the master of, I don't like that word, actually. I don't think that's a really great word to use. You can be the, maybe, authority in your own embodied experience, as opposed to feeling like your emotions are so important
Mm-hmm.
that you're at their whim.
For mercy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's this balance too, I think, right, of giving yourself, like, knowing that your emotions will don't have to control your life. Like,
Mm.
I mean, I'm always talking about how your thoughts control your emotions, and like you can
Mhm.
ultimately, which control your actions. So but at the same time, like, I'm not saying don't feel negative emotion, like that's not the point.
Yeah.
Like we're like, part of it is being able to give in to those emotions and just be like, okay, I'm willing to feel grief right now. Like, I'm
Mhm.
just willing to see where it goes. And if I only have 15 minutes to do it, that's cool. Or I'll revisit this later when I do have a little bit of time. Like, I want
Yeah.
to feel that experience. And then, yeah, I do have control
Yeah.
over this instead of just letting it, control me, which is the fear for so many folks about going there, right? Is
Yeah. Yeah.
it's never gonna end. It's gonna be so horrible, and I'm never gonna be able to get out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's the weirdest thing to hear a coach or a therapist or someone say, but your emotions aren't the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're chemical states that happen in your body, and sometimes they're related to the context and sometimes they're not. Like, and if we spend so much time trying to figure out why we have a particular emotion, then we're wasting the time we could be using to actually just move towards where we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's so important to think about, like, okay, yeah, I feel this right now, but what do I want to feel in an hour? And what can I do to
Mm-hmm.
help me get there?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really powerful, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So my foot's falling asleep.
I I'm my husband has a call actually on Skype, and it's going to affect our internet connection
No worries, we can
because
wrap it up in a minute.
we have super fabulous internet here.
Go for it.
um, I'm just aware that I could talk about this with you for hours
I
and
know,
hours and hours.
I'm super jazzed. That's a funny word, but it's exciting to nerd out with somebody about this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Maybe to sum up, like, what are your three or top five um elements that you think go into appropriate or effective self-care?
What are like top whatever elements that go in to self-care?
Yeah, what are the
Um,
maybe three key things?
no pressure, eh?
As if there's only three.
I mean, I think we've probably touched on most of them. Like, um, self-care is a necessity. Like, it's not an option. I mean, you can not do it, but in
Mm-hmm.
terms of um, any change you want to be making in your life, like, self-care is part of it, and it's not frivolous. It's necessary. It's not just something like that you do, that those people do, or like rich people do, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's available to everyone. It's more than bubble baths. Um, those are great, but like we said, feeling oh, what was my I just lost my train of thought. Um, oh, sometimes it's really hard. Self-care is can be really hard, and
Yeah.
totally worth it. And I had another thought. Um, self-care. I'm I'm gonna have to come back to it. What do you want to
For
answer?
part two of our talk. Um,
I got distracted by my cat. Sorry.
that's okay, because I got distracted by my dog in the other room going, because my husband's on a call now and not paying
Oh,
attention to him.
no attention.
It's the worst.
I know.
Worst. So I love what you said about self-care not being tied to socioeconomic status.
Mm-hmm.
And when we say self-care is about, you know, yoga and meditation retreats and bubble baths, it makes it inaccessible
Mm-hmm.
to people who can't afford to go out and do that. Like, self-care is for everybody and it's accessible for everybody. And I know we talked about, the importance of it being about boundaries, emotional boundaries, boundaries with other people. And I think there's a level of, like, assertiveness.
Mm-hmm.
Like, we need to have assertiveness with others and assertiveness with ourselves,
Yep.
right? Because it's not self-care if you don't feel that you're honoring your own journey and your own needs, and you're letting everyone else sort of dictate that. Which made me think that self-care is also a lot about delegating and asking for help. And maybe, I mean, we didn't really talk about that today, but perhaps another time, because that is one of the hardest things for people is not just knowing that they're worth self-care, but that they're worth asking others to assist in that.
Yeah, and letting go of some of the expectation, right, of needing to be able to do everything and be perfect and heal yourself and etc. And for a lot of folks, like self-care isn't necessarily tied to socioeconomic class, but it's certainly like more challenging in terms of time for certain folks than it is for others, right?
Absolutely.
You're like a single mom who's doing all of these things, like self-care is for sure going to fall by the wayside.
Absolutely it is. And it would be kind of, I don't know, very close-minded to use self-care as sort of a blanket prescription for everybody out there. Because I tell you, if I had a dog walker and a chef and, I don't know, someone to do all the work for me, well, yes, I would be at the spa all the time. I'd probably feel great. But would I feel good about myself too? Like, that's the other piece, because taking steps in our own journeys and our own growth, I think, is hugely important to our self-worth. And that's sort of where both of our coaching businesses collide, is that, you're looking at empowerment and I'm looking at like love addiction and breakups, but it all boils down to what's your foundation of self-esteem and
yes, girl,
sense of worth. And
and that was actually the point I was thinking about before, around that I forgot, around getting, like, I don't know what comes first, it's kind of a bit of both, of like getting to a point, like for self-care, the thing that you I might want to suggest you get at first is like coming to terms with your own worth, and that like you are worth self-care, because if you're not getting to that point, then it's going to be really hard to do the self-care. Their side of that is that self-care is much easier to do, like, and your worth becomes more apparent the more self-care you get to do. So it's really catch 22, but
yeah, and another rabbit hole to go down, but those who are systemically privileged in societies are infused with a stronger sense of worth because society says you matter, you belong, we highlight you. And so self-care becomes more palatable for them. So there are layers, right? And so, I mean, hopefully whoever is listening to this can walk away with the knowledge that, A, coaches are here to help. B, coaches are human because we do the work that we've also lived through and we get it. And it's not about a blanket solution for everybody. It's genuinely about getting to know exactly who you are and what your goals are and what's holding you back, and being that guiding light that's going to get you to the place that you want to be, because you do deserve to be there. No matter who you are, you deserve to be there.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a lovely way to sum it up. A lovely note to end on. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
So lovely to connect and see your face.
Yes.
Maybe we'll do this soon.
I'd love to. It's an absolute pleasure. I'll nerd out with you anytime.
Awesome. Okay, well, we'll chat soon. Take care of yourself, okay?
Bye.
Bye.